it's such a pleasure to welcome you on this beautiful Friday afternoon to this exciting edition of the Compelling Conversation series. We are bringing guests to campus to discuss a wide variety of contemporary issues, but this is purposefully not a lecture series. It is different. It's good to have lecture series, but this is different. This is a little less formal, a little more wide-ranging, and a different type of opportunity to get to know and engage with our guests. And of course, today our special guest is Cornel West. Dr. West holds the prestigious Dietrich Bonhoeffer Chair at Union Theological Seminary in New York. Dr. West previously served as professor of the practice of public philosophy at Harvard University and holds the title of professor emeritus at Princeton University. He earned his undergraduate degree from Harvard and both his MA and PhD in philosophy from Princeton. He's the author of 20 books. His most celebrated publications include Race Matters, Democracy Matters, and his memoir, Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud. Most recently, he co-authored Truth Matters, a dialogue on fruitful disagreement in an age of division with Dr. Robert George, fostering thoughtful discourse on contemporary social issues in the United States. In full disclosure, we had hoped to bring Dr. George here for this conversation, but he unfortunately had a conflict, and I'm sure we'll have some conversation about Dr. George and his collaboration with Dr. West. In 2024, Dr. West delivered the renowned Gifford Lectures at the University of Edinburgh, one of the most prestigious global honors in the field of theology. The title of this lecture series was A Jazz-Soaked Philosophy for Our Catastrophic Times, From Socrates to Coltrane, which you can now watch on YouTube. He was also an independent candidate for President of the United States in 2024. Cornel, we are so pleased to welcome you to Santa Clara University as part of our Compelling Conversation series. Dr. West's conversation partner is Dr. Christopher D. Tirres, the Michael J. Buckley S.J. Professor, and serves as strategic advisor to the Dean for Mission Integration in the College of Arts and Sciences here at Santa Clara. He is the author of Liberating Spiritualities, Reimagining Faith in the Americas, The Aesthetics and Ethics of Faith, a dialogue between liberationist and pragmatic thought, and is the co-editor of Religion in the Americas, Transhemispheric and Transcultural Approaches. Before coming to Santa Clara, Dr. Tirres taught at DePaul University, where he served as the inaugural endowed professor of diplomacy and interreligious engagement. Dr. Tirres currently serves as president-elect of the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians of the United States. A native of El Paso, Texas, he holds degrees from Princeton, Harvard Divinity School, and Harvard University. Dr. Tirres has known Dr. West for well over 3 decades. In fact, Dr. West served as Dr. Tirres's undergraduate senior thesis advisor.
It's true.
I think he passed. And was also a member of his dissertation committee some years later. I did not actually know this when I asked Chris to come to my office and asked him to be his conversation partner, so this was just, as they say, kismet. Chris, thank you for taking part in this, on this huge, but I'm sure joyous responsibility. I leave it to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Provost Glaser, it really is a joy and a privilege to be able to sit here with my dear teacher and mentor and friend, Cornel West. I first met Cornel West back in 1992. And I want to just share, before we get into the conversation, just 2 quick stories about how Cornel changed my life. So the first encounter I had at Cornell was at Princeton University. I was a junior. This was the fall of 1992. And like all students at Princeton, we have to write a junior paper. In the Department of Religion, this was a 30 to 40 page paper to be written your spring semester. So in the fall, we had to write a proposal about what we thought we would write about in the following semester. I was a religion major, and I was very interested in the time in Latin American liberation theology. And so I proposed to do something on Gustavo Gutierrez and his relationship with the Vatican, which was very contentious at that time. Well, lo and behold, I put my proposal in, and a few weeks later, I got a letter. We didn't have email at the time, but I got a letter in my inbox that said that my advisor was Cornel West. Truth be told, I had not yet taken a course with Cornel West. Now, of course, I knew that he was a big deal at Princeton, and everybody knew him, and everyone loved him. So, of course, I was a little nervous the first time I had to go to his office and meet my future advisor. So this is how it went down. I'm waiting in a long line, because he always had a long line outside of his office. And finally, it was my turn to come in. This was a scheduled appointment. I knock on the door, and he said, "Come in, come in." And I put my head in. He said, "Your dear brother Chris, correct?" And I said, "That's right." He said, "Have a seat, my dear brother." So I sat across from the desk, and he said, "Brother, where are you from?" And he said that with a big smile on his face. And I said, "Well, Professor West, I'm from El Paso, Texas." And his smile became a mile wide. He said, "Oh my God, brother, you are not going to believe this. I was conceived in El Paso, Texas." And hearing this information in the first few minutes of meeting this man, I knew this was going to be a very special relationship. And indeed it was. Indeed it was. It was the start of a beautiful relationship. Cornel continued to mentor me my junior year, as Jim mentioned, my senior year and my senior thesis. I had another wonderful mentor and advisor, David Carrasco, another titan in religious studies. So to be mentored by these two gentlemen and to be introduced to the life of the mind in a way that I hadn't really been before, that was a life-changing moment for me. Now, the second moment was at my senior thesis defense. And Cornel and David Carrasco were my readers. The defense went well, and at the end of the conversation, they said, "Well, what are you planning on doing next year, now that you're planning to graduate?" And I explained, "Well, I have a job back in El Paso, Texas. I'm going to do some educational nonprofit work." And then I kind of mumbled these half-baked thoughts, and then maybe I'm thinking about law school or maybe public policy school. And they looked at me, and then they looked at each other, and then Cornel, in a very gentle way, he looked over to me and he whispered, he said, "Brother, we think you should consider graduate school in religion." And that was like an aha moment, because truth be told, that was not even on my radar, not even within the realm of my possibility. So they helped to plant the seed, and they saw something in me that I did not yet see in myself. And for that, I am eternally grateful to have this profession, this vocation as a professor, which has been such a beautiful ride for the past 20 years, and especially to be now here at Santa Clara University for the past 3. So thank you, Cornel, for that opportunity. So the plan is I have about maybe 7 different subjects or categories I like to cover, and we'll see how we wind our way through them. But this is also a subtle way to let you know, don't spend too much time on any one particular topic, because we got to get through a whole list of things, all right? But we'll see how the conversation goes.
That's beautiful.
So maybe the first thing to start with is some biographical notes, just so you can get to know who Cornel West is, where he grew up, what is important to him. So we're going to start with two things that you talk about. Every time I hear you talk, Cornel, you always mention two pillars in your life. Those are your family, beginning with your father, Clifton Jr. West, and your mother, Irene West. You always talk about them, and you always mention Shiloh Baptist Church. And in fact, in your memoir, you said, look, this is really where my story begins. So I'm wondering if you can maybe say a little bit about those beginnings, and maybe one way to think about the question is that for folks who don't know you or don't know your story, I mean, I think a lot of folks will see you as an intellectual, an Ivy League intellectual, a social critic, a man of letters. I think some folks may have a difficult time putting that side of who you are, the public intellectual, alongside the Cornel West who grew up in Shiloh Baptist Church. So how do you understand the relationship between those two parts of your being? Let's start there.
Oh, all right. But my God, I'm just so blessed to be back to this consecrated place. And the very fact that you all are kind enough to allow me back, and then just to set eyes on my brother. Every time I see him, it just adds years to my life. It really does, because he's got a special sunshine and light inside of him that connects his brilliant intellect with his sweet soul. And then to see his two daughters, I hadn't seen, my God. And then you have your brother at Juilliard, magnificent Allison. You're going to give her a hug for me, right? Because I met both of Allison and this brother there at Princeton. So I'm just, overwhelmed. And the same is true when last time I was here. My dear brother Akiba, he's like family with his father, Rabbi Michael Lerner, and I, who wrote books together, traveled all over the country, hunted down sometimes. But I love my dear brother Michael. Now, I remember my brother Akiba when he was running around in short pants before he was Phi Beta Kappa at Berkeley and off to Stanford. So to have both of these brothers, who are family to me, here at Santa Clara University. And then when I ran into the brother on the bicycle, what's his name? Daniel Press. Is he here? Is Daniel Press here? There he is. He's got his brim on too. My God, all of that love flowing out of him. It was just a beautiful, beautiful thing. Then I met the Provost, and I said, Lord, now he can't be in the same spiritual level of excellence, and he turns out to be such a wonderful brother too, the Provost James Glaser. Give it up for him. Give it up to our brother. He said his wife will be sitting on the front row, the most beautiful woman in the room. I said, I like that kind of attitude too. Give it up for her. Give it up for her. Absolutely. So that I begin on a note saying that all of us really are. I know I am who I am because somebody loved me. Somebody cared for me. Somebody actually took time to shape and mold me. I call it soul craft, character formation, the cultivation of mustering the courage to love, not just wisdom, not just beauty, not just goodness and the holy, but actually your neighbor. And some of us who decide to follow Jesus of Nazareth, even our enemies. You see, this love thing is no plaything at all. And I learned that from Irene and Clifton. I learned that from Clifton, Cynthia, and Cheryl. That's my brother. It's the highest act of grace other than God's unfailing grace was to be born in that web of love. I'm talking about the real thing that Ashford and Simpson sang about. I'm talking about the real thing you heard Aretha singing about. The real thing of John Coltrane's Love Supreme. The real thing of Love and Need of Love of Stevie Wonder. We got a wonderful musician right here, James Gordon Williams. Professor at University of Santa Cruz. Y'all forgive him for that. He's not teaching. But your son is coming here, right? There he is. Give it up for the son on the way, on the way, he's on the way. Yeah, he's on the way. His brother's a musician too. So that, and all of us have this, but we know, of course, that love is really the key that unlocks the door to ultimate reality in terms of what sustains us from mama's womb to tomb. And to be able to have that, the West family, connected to Reverend Willie P. Cook, who was my pastor, who baptized me, and Deacon Hinton, who was head of my deacon board, and Sarah Ray, who was head of my vacation Bible school and Sunday school department. And we were told over and over again, if the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, you ought to leave a little heaven behind. That's the real thing. Salute Sister Melissa, being so kind. People leaving heaven behind in a hellish world, in a nightmarish world. Because I come from a great black people who've been hated chronically for 400 years. So love itself has revolutionary, emancipatory, unbelievable, liberatory consequences, not just in your own life, but in your relation to other people. It's not something in the abstract. And it's not something that's obsessed with what's coming at one, so you don't end up a parasite on the hatred coming at you. You fall back on your tradition of love that equips you to deal with the hate, to deal with the terror, to deal with the trauma, to deal with the sadness and the sorrow and the despair and the hopelessness, because you're on intimate terms with all of them. But none of them have the last word, because you got something that the folk coming at you didn't give you and they can't take away. And that's love. And that fruit of love is always joy. You know, the great Chesterton, I know he's a late convert, but God bless him. God bless Chesterton, that last chapter of, last paragraph really, of Orthodoxy of 1908. He says, joy is the gigantic secret of the Christian. That Jesus never attempted to hide his anger when he went into the temple and ran out the money changers. He never tried to hide his tears, unlike Socrates, who never sheds a tear, which means he loved wisdom but never loved anybody. Anybody's never shed a tear, never loved anybody. Your child, your friend, your mama, your daddy, your wife, your sibling, whatever. Jesus weeps. That's powerful. Jeremiah does too. Yes, all our Hebrew scripture provides that rich way of hesed. Very, very much so. But it's the armor that's most important. And I obtained that armor with the West family and with the Shiloh. Now, the Black Panther Party was right next door. Mm-hmm. And so I worked with them very, very closely, but they were very dogmatic on the God question. Because I'm a Jesus-loving, free black man. So I take Jesus with me everywhere I go. So I worked closely with them until they shut down in 72. With the breakfast program, with the prison program, I was deeply shaped by the witness of the Bobby Seals and Erica Browns and Huey Newtons and others. But I always put love at the center of it, and they had a critique. That was a secular critique. I understood it, appreciate it. We all need Nietzsche. We need all of the secular thinkers, Marx and others. We learn from them. But they're wrong on the God question, for me.
Let's pick it up there, the God question.
Yes.
So you mentioned Pastor Cook.
Yes, Willie P.
Baptized. You and your brother were baptized together around age 12, is that correct?
Well, I was 7, he was 9.
7 and 9, mm-hmm. 7 and 9. So you're baptized.
But still a voluntary baptism, though.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to make that clear as a Baptist. I don't want to get this thing ecclesiastically twisted, you know what I mean?
But you write in your memoir of the power of that moment, of actually being submerged in the waters of baptism. And so I'm wondering if you can reflect on that, but also reflect on that alongside another moment of spiritual awakening, which I haven't heard you talk too much about in these kinds of settings. But I'm thinking here of Madame Marie in Orange, Texas. Oh, yeah. And if I can remember the story correctly, you've suffered pretty badly from asthma. Absolutely. And you were visiting your grandparents in Orange, Texas, and you heard that there was a woman down the street who can help. And the first question you had, well, is she a Christian? And you found out she was not a Christian. But your brother was so concerned that he wanted to take you to see her. You went, and something happened. So tell us that story. How do you connect that kind of spiritual awakening to the baptism? Is there a connection there?
Well, I've never been asked that question in all my life. You've been doing some close reading. Very close reading. Oh, Santa Clara University. Oh, blessed to have this. It made me recognize that mystery is so overwhelming in terms of how we go about in our own lives, because I had a very bad case of asthma, and I was going to be the next Willie Mays or James Brown, either one. And it's hard to be either with asthma. You know what I mean? The third song, big pay back. No, that's not going to do it. Or the third inning, you're about to collapse. And we went to Orange, Texas, on the chocolate side. They had Jim Crow in those days, of course. Jim Crow Senior. We still got Jim Crow Junior today. We'll talk about that. But, and they said that she has a cure for asthma. And so she lined me up and she cut a little hole right at the top of my head. And my hair was gone. I said, well, I don't really like that. But Rudolph, one of my friends, he said it worked. She cut my hair and a little hole in my head, and the next 3 days, it was gone. And it hasn't come back yet. I'll be 73 in 3 days, and I was 13 years old. So it worked. It worked. Now, when I went back and told Big Daddy, who was the head of the deacon board at Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church, he said, you know, you should have asked me about that, son, because I know about that woman. And I've heard that it works too, but I'm not advertising that. I'm not putting that out. I said, but I'm going to tell the truth. That conjuring woman knows what she's doing. And anybody else have asthma? I'll tell you, go see her. So it meant then that as a follower of Jesus of Nazareth, that Palestinian Jew coming out of Bethlehem in Galilee, and my fundamental commitment to being a follower of that Christ Jesus meant that I had to have an openness to the mystery that flowed far beyond so many of the stories I had heard growing up in Shiloh. Very much so. And so already I had a kind of built-in sensitivity to what these days they would call interreligious dialogue. Now, on bell hooks, of course, who I don't really exist in many ways without bell hooks' deep influence, who was a Buddhist sister. We wrote a book together, Breaking Bread, just like the book with Brother Lerner on Jews and blacks. And she was serious about her Buddhism. Before we began to write and so forth, she got Buddhists sitting there right there checking us out. I said, oh, good God Almighty, because I don't have Jesus checking me out. But she's serious about that. And same would be true. Of course, I don't exist without Malcolm X. There's no doubt about that. Malcolm's a serious Muslim brother. You know what I mean? Very much so. Now, your first question was about?
Well, it was just about the spiritual awakening and how does
the
Shiloh
baptism.
And baptism.
Well, this is very important, especially for what's going on here at Santa Clara University. Because you remember when a Jewish brother named Paul writes in the Christian New Testament as a convert from Judaism to now the major proponent of this breakthrough flowing out of prophetic Judaism that will become Christianity. He says Christians must learn how to die daily. Die daily. That was the eulogy that the great Dorothy Day, who's one of the greatest prophetic voices of the catastrophic 20th century, Catholic sister, when she, in her newspaper, the Catholic Worker, she just wrote a line at the top. Martin Luther King Jr. learned how to die daily. What does it mean to die?
Let's actually pick up.
Mean to die.
Let's pick up on that.
Baptism is a certain sign of it, but education at the deepest level is a learning how to die in order to learn how to live.
This is exactly where I want to go.
All right, all right.
Where I want to go.
Oh, yes.
So here at the university, we talk a lot about Ignatian pedagogy. We talk a lot about educating students, educating ourselves in the deepest way possible.
Absolutely.
And actually, my dear colleague, Paul Schutz, does a lot of important work here at the university around this question. This is what Paul writes. He says, Ignatian pedagogy is all about humanization, or forming students, not just teaching them to be whole persons who live their lives for a greater good. Education in the Ignatian tradition is about awakening the dignity of each of our students and colleagues and leading them to discover their truest selves. Now, we also talk about cura personalis, which means the care of the whole person, understanding the person as in their entirety. And Paul writes something interesting here as well. And I'm thinking that when I first read this, I thought about you, Cornel, because he says, cura personalis is an active, intentional dedication to the flourishing of others. If this is the framing, he writes, cura personalis is as much about being kind as it is about shaking students out of indifference, disrupting racist, sexist, homophobic, or transphobic views, challenging the prioritization of profit over the good of all. In this sense, cura personalis can also mean challenging students to see and engage the realities of injustice and suffering. And I remember being a sophomore at Princeton, there was an African American Studies conference. You spoke at it when Nima Lubiano was there. And I remember you said something about education that blew my mind because I was not expecting to hear this. You said something like, education should be something that, quote, unsettles, unnerves, and maybe even unhouses some students so that they experience that wonderful vertigo and dizziness in recognizing, at least for a moment, that their worldview rests on pudding. So I'm wondering if you can reflect, what does that mean within a setting like this of Ignatian values, Ignatian pedagogy? How key is that unsettling aspect to education, to the work that we do at a Catholic Jesuit institution?
Yeah, I think that this rich tradition of our Jesuit brothers who were so fundamentally committed to what the Greeks would call paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A. And paideia is not cheap schooling, it's deep education. Schooling is just access to facts, information, on to get a job, plug in and live in some vanilla suburb. Education is about learning how to die. And when you critically examine yourself, society, and the world, and you let certain assumptions and presuppositions go, you let certain dogma go, you let certain prejudices go, that's a form of death in order to be reborn, in order to develop, in order to mature. So the three things you need, the first thing is formation of attention, the thing that Simone Weil talked about so well. Most cultures, including this culture, is trying to gear people's attention toward stimulation, titillation, addiction, distraction. How do you attend to the things that matter? Life, death, joy, sorrow, integrity, honesty, decency, courage, highest levels of spiritual excellence. The great Alfred North Whitehead and William James used to say, paideia at its deepest level is trying to inculcate a habitual vision of excellence so that when you look and feel and when you act, you're cutting against the forms of convention that are in place, which makes you in the world but not of the world, which makes you over against the world, not conform but transformed by the power of heart, mind, soul, situating you within a tradition. Now that's prophetic sensibility is what Whitehead calls a noble discontent. You see, that's what Socrates had. He had a noble discontent. He may not have shed a tear, but he had some questions. And those questions were always unsettling, against the grain, got him in a lot of trouble on the way to the hemlock. Jeremiah, Esther, Jesus, Muhammad, all the way up to Martin King, Edward Said, Rabbi Heschel. Noble discontent. Now, in Zaid's case, it takes a secular form, even though his grandfather was the first Baptist minister in the Middle East, but that's just his lineage. I know that's a little unfair, but that's his family. That's why he's Edward rather than Muhammad, you see, because he's got that connection with the Protestantism as a Palestinian brother. But it's that noble discontent, and it comes in a lot of different forms. More than anything else now, I think, is that we just need more courage. You see, all this organized greed and weaponized hatred and then routinized indifference. Remember what Heschel used to say, indifference to evil is what? More insidious than evil itself. Is that right, Brother Akiba? More insidious than evil itself, turning away toward the weak, turning away from the vulnerable, whoever they are, wherever they are. And it leads toward a certain kind of spiritual death or suicide or emptiness or vacuity, however you want to characterize it, which is, very much where we're headed if we don't have what's going on at the best of a Santa Clara University, which is paideia. And everybody lands where they land. It's kind of enactment of the anthem of black people, which is lift every voice. That's right, lift every voice. It doesn't say lift every echo, because echo ain't nothing but an extension of a silo. It doesn't take no struggle. It doesn't take no wrestling with the dark corners of your own soul just to be an echo expression, a silo. If all you're going to do is an echo, you just sing in Mike's basement after night at about 3 a.m. when everybody's drunk. They bring you out. But if you find your voice the way Sarah found hers, with Savon or whoever it is, it could be a Tupac or it could be a Curtis Mayfield, they're going to bring you on at the high moment of the concert. Because you got something to say, but you can't find that voice unless it's bouncing off against the voice of others, especially the voices of the dead. One of the reasons why Catholic institutions of higher learning right now are experiencing less crisis than our secular ones was because at least the Catholic brothers and sisters were wedded to connecting the quick and the dead. You can't walk on this campus and not feel the presence and voices of the dead. Not just the crosses, El Salvador and others. Not just St. Ignatius. Suarez, we can go on and on, that rich tradition of Jesuits, the Lonergans and the Rawners and Murrays and others. These people mean much because they found their voices. And you had young folk coming in as echoes in the process of learning how to die in order to find their voice. So like a blues woman or a jazz man, when you do find your voice, Monk told Coltrane, quit imitating Johnny Hodges of the Duke Ellington Band. Johnny Hodges sounds like Johnny Hodges. You got to sound like Train. Really? What you mean? Come to my house. Let me play some notes for you. Oh, Monk, that sounds wrong. Sometimes wrong is right. I don't want to sound like the other piano players. I'm Monk. I'm Theological. Finding your voice. Young people, magnificent students come through this place. How do you find your voice? Courage. And something else, too, which we really don't like to talk about too much because with integrity. I mean, it's very interesting that, see, integrity is not a biblical notion or category. It becomes most manifest, actually, in the Christian tradition when John Calvin gives the first of his 159 sermons, beginning February 26, 1554. And in those days, you had to preach every day. And John Calvin would speak for 2 hours, no notes, with one verse. I just Remind students of the level of discipline. Just like Coltrane had to play 4 sets when he came to Oakland, right? So you better get your songs together. We don't want to just hear what you have played, what's on your mind. And what did Calvin say? He said, I'm reading this book of Job, and the only category I can use is the Roman category. He falls back on his Renaissance humanist education. He pulls out Cicero. He pulls out Quintilian. He said, I don't see it in Hebrew scripture. I don't see it in Koine Greek. I don't see it even in the church fathers. Integrity. It's the Roman category. Integrity. What is integrity? Learning how to put your whole self in what you do. So that eloquence is integrity in sentences, in paragraphs. You put your whole self in your words, in your relationships. And it's very connected to my own black tradition, you see, which is kenosis. Now, of course, it comes from the Greeks, but everybody knows that if you don't put your whole self in what you sing, in what you do, in how you walk, in how you talk, to show who you really are, that makes you distinctive, just like your fingerprint, then you're not meeting the highest standards. No matter how smart you are, no matter how good you sound on your horn. People used to say that to Wynton all the time. I love Wynton Marsalis to death. Say, Wynton, that sounds at a level of technical superiority that's overwhelming. But it ain't Miles. Wynton say, what you mean?
That's right.
And Wynton was only 18, 19, so he learned. What do you mean? We want to hear you.
Yeah.
Your voice. We don't want to hear your training. We don't want to hear your practices. We want to hear what's inside of you. I was blessed to write songs with a genius named Bootsy Collins. On Funk Capital of the World. We wrote 2 songs. We traveled the country together.
Well, let's transition here.
Yes.
Another person you've been traveling the country with is Robert George.
Oh, yes, Brother Robert. But Robert ain't Bootsy now.
Oh, I know. Make that very clear.
I love Brother Robbie, but he's not Bootsy now. Let's just keep that.
So for those of you who don't know, Robert George is a conservative intellectual, teaches at Princeton University, teaches in the Department of Politics. And Cornel and Robert George wrote a book together called Truth Matters. And the whole idea of this book is to be able to create a space that you're able to talk through lines of difference, generating an element of respect, generating an element of care for your interlocutor. So I have 3 questions for you, Cornel.
Yes.
So number 1, and just a little bit of background here. You all got together, I think it was 2006. There was a student who introduced you.
Yeah, Brother Andrew.
Brother Andrew, and he said that we're going to start a new literary magazine at Princeton University. And they came to you and they said, we'd like to have a conversation between 2 professors. We'd like you to interview somebody. And Cornel says, that would be great. I want to interview Robert George, right? So first question is, why did you choose Robert George out of everyone at Princeton? Number 2, what has sustained your relationship and your ability to speak across difference with your dear brother, Robert George? And then thirdly, how, if at all, has Robert George changed your mind about something?
All 3 of those, huh? Ooh, my dear
pick
brother.
2.
My dear brother. No, one is that I've always felt that Brother Robert George was somebody who enacted an integrity. That's what brings he and Bootsy together. That he says what he means and he means what he says, even when he's wrong. True. I love him when he's wrong. I love him when he's right. I love him when he's half wrong. I love him when he's half right. But he doesn't pose imposture. You see, part of the escalating decadence of the culture of professionalism among the professional managerial classes of our declining and decaying empire is that people are not honest and candid. They don't have integrity. They pose, they posture. They say things that other people want them to say. They don't want to go against the grain. They don't want to pay the cost of noble discontent. How come? Because the culture of professionalism that reinforces specialization with all of the different jargons for the highly specialized discourses, creates a conformity, and the aim is upward mobility rather than soul formation. Now, Brother Robbie's at that time, he was one of the few. We only had about 2 or 3 members of the Princeton faculty who were real hardcore conservatives. I mean, he's an anti-Trump conservative, but hardcore conservative, you know what I mean? So I said, it's going to be fascinating just to have an example of somebody like myself, hang loose Baptist, trying to speak the truth in justice, go to jail, try to be in solidarity with poor and working people around the world, no matter what. So I don't really fully fit with one ideology. But when I go to jail, they're usually leftists that's going with me. Communists, socialists, anarchists, prophetic Jews, prophetic Muslims, prophetic Christians, and so on, right? And we hit it off. We had dialogue for 4 hours and so forth and so on. And now we've done it all around the country. We've been in prisons. We've been in a variety of different contexts. We're spending a lot of time now in elementary schools. A lot of times now in elementary schools with the young people. And so in that sense, this issue of integrity is important. Why? Because it's just so easy these days, given overwhelming despair, just to give up, just to cave in. God bless you. Just to sell out, and then try to rationalize it, try to justify it. Where the youth, well, I can't tell you what I really believe, but these things are so bad, and I got to say this in order to gain access to this. I've got to make sure that I'm presenting this side of my face or putting on the mask, as it were. And James Baldwin says, what about the mask? Love forces us to take off the mask. We know we cannot live within, but fear we cannot live without. Take that mask off and find out who you really are. Like Levinas, what does your face really look like? What's gone into the making of your face with all of the wrinkles, all of the wounds and bruises and scars manifest in your face? Integrity, not purity. Not purity, not at all. Not at all. And we're living in a world now where, the gangsterization of the empire and the gangsterization of the globe is a triumph with Thrasymachus over Socrates and Plato's Republic. And might makes right, power dictates every form of morality. The strong will crush the weak, and all the weak can do is have to put up with it and adjust themselves. Integrity becomes more and more important, and that cuts across politics, ideology, cuts across religion, it cuts across educational institutions. And that's why when you have persons of integrity in places, especially in high places, that makes all the difference in the world. I see it right now in the crisis of the black freedom movement, the crisis of the black church. You see, Malcolm X, Malcolm be as wrong as 2 left shoes when he said all white people are devils. He said it with integrity, which meant that he meant it. He just wrong. And when he changed his mind, he said it with the same honesty and integrity. He said, I was wrong. All white folk not devils. Just a whole lot of them got devilish proclivities. I'm keeping track of it. But he knew that's true for black and brown and indigenous and Asian. It's a human thing. But he had integrity. You could believe him. He wasn't just saying it in order to get on TV, in order to gain access to some job or move up in the social justice movement or whatever it is. The brother was for real. That's what we need. And that's what the younger generation has a hunger for these days.
Well, this is probably a great segue into the question of politics.
Yes.
So if I'm not mistaken, I remember you once telling a number of us students, correct me if I'm wrong, on your birthday when you were in Cambridge, did you go to visit the tomb of, was it Emerson?
Ralph Waldo?
Yeah.
It could have been.
Concord?
It could have been.
On his birthday, there was one year.
It could have been. Is it in Cambridge?
Well, in Concord.
Yeah, oh no, that's Ralph. Yeah, that's Ralph.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely
And you said,
right.
well, what are you going to do for your birthday? You said, I'm going to go to
That's right.
Ralph Waldo Emerson's grave. That's how I'm going to celebrate my
I forgot
birthday.
about
And that's when I realized, wow, he really loves Ralph Waldo Emerson. And of course, Emerson is known for his commitment to individuality, not individualism.
That's right. Absolutely.
But a deep integrity there with his commitment to his individuality. So the other thing that I want to say is that when I've heard you talk about kind of your positions and going into the political fray, you start with this very deep commitment to your own personal integrity. And you've said, many times it leaves me in a very lonely place.
Oh, sure.
So this is the question, and this isn't the first time I've heard you. I'm sure you've been asked this question, but in 2024, you ran for president of the U.S. Many people, especially on the left, were concerned that your candidacy might take away votes from Biden. So I've heard you defend your position on 2 counts.
Oh, you mean Sister Kamala Harris?
Sorry.
Well, Biden initially.
And
then we had a shift.
You're
right. You're right.
So the first thing,
right.
Thank you. The first thing, your first response is that you were targeting the 40% of folks who don't vote. And then the second is that you wanted to make sure that our political discourse proceeded with spiritual and moral integrity. And there's that word again, integrity. But all this said, detractors might still claim that strategically speaking, that's the key phrase, strategically speaking, your candidacy still threatened to siphon votes from the Democratic Party. I'm wondering how you wrestle with that question.
Oh, yeah, but no, I had no problem with that question at all. Because I believe, just like with our students, we want our students to find their voices. And wherever they come down, they come down. I want people to think hard about an election and vote for who you want to vote for. No candidate owns the vote. They make the case and people choose. So if the Democratic Party, with this little milquetoast, mediocre, market-driven, institutional practice for the most part, you got some examples. You know, Brother Bernie and others are the exception, so I don't want to be monolithic, but I come close sometimes. I mean, it's very sad that we don't have a Democratic Party that is robust and strong and committed to issues of poverty and mass incarceration and wealth inequality and concerned about cutting back the vicious imperial wars. I mean, that would be a wonderful thing. It would be a wonderful thing. We just don't, for the most part. We just don't. And so all I was doing was, one, whatever I do, I'm not running for office. I'm running for Jesus. Amen. Come on now. That's who I am. I've always been that. From the very beginning. Till the day I die. And it spills over to running for justice. But any justice that's only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice. We know that from Hebrew scripture. You got to have something deeper than justice. Mercy. Deeper than mercy. Love. Loving kindness. Try a little tenderness. That's part of Hesed. That's not just justice. That's existential. That's spiritual. That's psychic and structural and institutional. And all I was doing was doing what? Trying to convince the country to understand the best of itself. And the best of itself has been persons who, given their finitude and fallibility, have tried to stand up for quest for truth and beauty and justice, and in some cases, the holy, and to have the younger generation see what it looks like. See what it looks like. So we started in Mississippi with Fannie Lou Hamer's Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party. We got their endorsement. Then we began with our critique. United States, the only empire, there's been roughly 70 of them since the beginning of the species. The only empire that denies it's an empire. That's not a good start. That's denial. That's claims of innocence. That's evasion. That's avoidance. You have to confront reality, just like when we acknowledge the land. You acknowledge reality. That was genocidal. That was imperial expansion. Those babies have the same value as babies in Gaza, babies in Tel Aviv, babies in Lagos, babies in Chicago, babies in Santa Clara, babies in Thailand. And that's not just a platitude. That's something you try to live. And then it went on to say, well, Democratic Party, what do you have to say about mass incarceration? What do you have to say about poverty? What do you have to say about Gaza and genocide? What do you have to say about repressive apparatuses at work in Iran, not as a talking point for the State Department, but because an Iranian baby's got the same value as any other baby in the world. They're not pawns on an international board in that sense. And we had a magnificent time. Now, of course, we were broke as the Ten Commandments financially. And the Democratic Party paid almost $21 million to keep us off the ballot. So we had a number of different court cases. We won most of them, but that's after the election. So they're thinking I'm taking votes away from Sister Harris. No, let the sister make up a case. Now, let's listen. I'm not Trump. I'm not Trump. I'm a brilliant black woman. Yes, you are. I'm a graduate of Howard. Thank God Almighty. What else? What is your relation to Wall Street? What is your relation to the greed of oligarchs in San Francisco? What is your relation to plutocrats? What is your relation to the various lobbyists? We're talking truth. This ain't got nothing to do with skin pigmentation. It cuts deeper than that. If somebody try to attack my dear sister as a white supremacist, I'll jump in and try to protect her. Because I love my sister. She just don't have enough courage in a milquetoast party. And that's true for most of them across the board. You say, well, Brother West, you got to be pragmatic. Don't bring pragmatism in. You're talking about opportunism, not pragmatism. That's not John Dewey. That's not William James. That's not Charles Sanders Peirce. No. Pragmatism is about vision. You wrote your, was it a junior paper on John Dewey?
Senior dissertation.
Yes. Oh, God. That's right. There's a paper on John Dewey this brother wrote. Powerful, but they call it pragmatism. No. You're just justifying your opportunism. If you don't start with the least of these, if you don't start with folk in the barrio dealing with ICE coming at, if you don't start with folk in the hood dealing with police and dealing with guns and dealing with drugs and dealing with decrepit schools and unavailable health care and shattered communities, if you don't start with the poor white brothers and sisters, if you don't start with those in various parts of the world, then we're not really talking about integrity. That's all. You can't win, Brother West, talking about integrity. You got a good point. Got a good point. Socrates and Jesus and Amos. It's not like they mobilized mass movements with overwhelming victory. They're voices that keep us honest. And everyone makes their various choices given the lanes that they are in. Ourselves as professors, you know, we're members of the professional managerial classes. You know, our grandparents were not.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Your precious daughters and sons. Thank God Almighty. But without integrity and honesty and decency and courage, what is a human life in the end? Because we're not here that long anyway.
That's right. That's right.
Not at all. But there's a lot of joy in it. But crucifixion could be waiting for you too.
Yeah. So let's talk. I have two more sets of questions. You've kind of peppered many references to some of the great artists of our time. Music and art are very important to you.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of what is the connection between music and art and this quest for truth and justice. And as a side question, what's the fascination with Stephen Sondheim?
Oh, wow, that's unadulterated genius in an artistic mode. He's also my brother. He just passed just a few years ago. We spent good time together. But let me just say this, and this might sound a little bit too dogmatic for you, but I think that artists are really the vanguard of the species. But by artists, I'm not talking about these isolated individuals who generate art objects. I'm talking about all of those who attempt to shape and mold the world in various forms, in various ways, which means that in the end, the greatest artists are the artists of life, the artists of living. Remember, Shakespeare makes that point in The Tempest at the very end. He says, all of my beautiful words don't mean that much if you view this art as some isolated source of stimulation. I want you to take it in and be unsettled so that you become an artist of living. He didn't say it exactly like that. I added some things. You can just call it a blues injection of Shakespeare. It's a little blues in Shakespeare. But that's the crucial thing, because, see, what art is concerned about is the deepest forms of paideia, which give us a sense of the whole, which means we have a sense of history, we have a sense of our dependence, we have a sense of our interdependence with one another, the quick and the dead, the present and the past, in order to keep track of the whole, the earth, ecological catastrophe, nuclear catastrophe, social arrangements of nation to nation, economic and political catastrophe when elites become thoroughly corrupt. And we know empires come and go. John Adams said that among the founding fathers. What did John Adams say? He said these social experiments come and go, that the demos can be just as tyrannical as a king. If citizens themselves don't have civic courage, don't have civic vision, then in fact the demos in the name of the people will tyrannize. That's been the history of black people in America. It was the vanilla majority that supported barbaric enslavement of Africans. It was the barbaric vanilla brothers and sisters who supported Jim Crow. So don't say, well, if the majority votes for it, it must be right. No, that's a lie. Hitler could have mobilized the barbaric majority in Germany against our precious Jewish brothers and sisters. If they don't have a moral and spiritual dimension to your majority, then critique, then resistance, then opposition is required. That's a very important point. It's a very important point. It doesn't make you anti-democratic. It just means that gangsters can use anything in any manner to try to reproduce their power. And the best we have are Hebrew 12:1, cloud of witnesses. Every generation has got to produce and unleash love warriors, just like this brother, freedom fighters, joy sharers, wounded healers, visionary servants of something bigger than their own egos, something bigger than their own narcissistic predicaments. That's the best we have. That's what we were talking about earlier. The great traditions of those who came before, who trying to hold up the torch and say integrity, courage, compassion, service to others, keeping track of poor people, keeping track of working people, keeping track of our precious trans and gays and lesbians, or anyone else made in the image of God who sees their sanctity and dignity being crushed. That's how you hold it up. And every generation, it's a challenge. The good news, of course, is that there always is a cloud of witnesses, and the good news is that history is shot through with the mystery, always incomplete and unfinished, and always open-ended. We don't know when the shift will take place. You just don't know when.
So history is open-ended. I'll end here. History is open-ended.
Yes, yes. That's good news.
The other side of that is that you've often said, with very good reason, that the human species is a wretched species.
Overwhelming evidence for that, yes. You don't have to read Dostoevsky just for that, but overwhelming evidence. That's right.
And we're really living in a wretched time.
Every time is wretched, but there are degrees and gradations.
I want you to speak to the degree of wretchedness that we're living in now, and to address the question, do we have what it takes in 2026 to draw on that cloud of witness, to turn the corner, to see a new Jerusalem open up. Where do you see us in the next 5, 15, 50 years?
I just don't know, though, brother. I just don't know. What I do know is that everywhere I go, I see clouds of witnesses of different people making choices to be forces for good in a variety of different forms. They don't have the institutional power, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the collective resources, but they're doing some wonderful things given what they do have access to. That's beautiful. And in institutions of higher learning, you see these possibilities. People matriculating through a Santa Clara University. You don't know where they're going to end up. And it's not just exclusively Catholic. What's the percentage of Catholic brothers and sisters? About what, 40-some% or so? Somewhere around there?
50.
Absolutely. So you got the Catholics, you got the secular folk, you got the Jews, you got Muslims, I hope you got a few Baptists coming through like me. We Baptists need some Catholic interaction. But the Catholics need some Baptist interaction too. But I don't know of a historical moment where clouds of witnesses have been completely eliminated, erased, and thoroughly silent, even given the most grim and dim times. Not at all. We could think of the worst of colonialism, the worst of imperialism. You can think of the worst of fascism, of Nazism, and so forth. They were still moving. You know that wonderful play by my dear brother Arthur Miller, who was also very connected to Sondheim, too. I used to go see both of them every summer. And Arthur Miller wrote this plays about the Jewish brothers and sisters playing the violins in the concentration camps. You all know that play? You know that one, Akiba? That beautiful, beautiful. That human spirit that was still there in that dire situation. See, the same thing with the smiles on the Palestinian children given the genocidal attacks. The same thing with Armenians, genocidal attacks. Same things in Rwanda, genocidal attacks. What is it about the human spirit? I'm not an optimist, I'm a blues man. Blues ain't got nothing to do with optimism, but it produces prisoners of hope who wrestle with despair every day. And there's never been a moment in which all of the faces, all of the voices have been wiped out. Look at the Irish brothers and sisters. 800 years of vicious British colonialism, and they still on the move. Beckett, what you got to say? Try again, fail better. That's Beckett. He's a vanilla blues man from Ireland, dreaming in French and English. He's coming from a similar tradition, different than mine, overlapped in a human way, and we can see that. I say the same thing about, colonized Africans. I say the same thing about colonized Caribbeans and so forth. So in that sense, I do have a hope, but it's deeply, deeply entrenched in a despair. But I draw a distinction between retail despair and wholesale despair. People come up to me all the time. Brother West, I don't see why you're not pessimistic. Of course I'm pessimistic. I'm a sensitive human being. I see what's going on. But I'm a retail pessimist. Pessimism doesn't have the last word. I go down fighting like Duke Ellington. Don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. You go down fighting. So that any despair doesn't have the last word at all, like the 32nd chapter of Genesis. Wrestling, angel of death, midnight hour, wounded, scarred, bruised. Here comes, with the wounds, new energy. We are God wrestlers. We're going to continue to bear witness. But we know how grim and dim it is. We're not denying anything at all. But we're going to keep loving our kids, our families, others, not just in our own neighborhoods, in our own tribes and clans, but loving others around the world, and for me, always putting the priority on the most unloved, the widows, the orphans, the godless, the fatherless, the motherless, and so forth. And in that sense, there's a joy. There really is a joy, and it's a joy that can never, ever be crushed. You know, they used to say about Martin King that one of the reasons why he was able to sustain himself is that he had conquered the fear of death and the love of money. So when you conquer both of those, you're much freer than you could ever be. Because you can't be bought out, and you can't just run scared. You can't be intimidated. You're free. And that kind of freedom is a spiritual, a psychic, a moral freedom. So no matter what the social and political circumstances are, you're still walking around with style and a smile. And that's very much the history of black people in the United States. How is it that these black folk, after all of these generations, 244 generations of barbaric slavery, the average slave died at 27, and your child is sold to North Carolina and you in Georgia. And then after that, here comes neo-slavery. Every 2.5 days, you got a lynching. The strange fruit the southern trees bear that Billie Holiday sang about, the Jewish brother Maripol writing the lyrics. How you still walking around like you got oil wells in your back pockets, as Maya Angelou would say. Part of our challenge these days is that we're losing that in the black community because the spiritual decadence has now so deeply infiltrated the black community and the black freedom movement that it's harder for black people to gain access to the sources of spirit, the sources of courage, the sources of vision. How come? Marketization, commodification, the dangling of money, the carrots, the co-optation, the incorporation of an establishment that knows that it is sinking and holding on for dear life. That's true for both parties. Because, I mean, Republican Party, I think, is just neo-fascist in its own way with Trump. Now, not everybody in the party, but Trump himself is just clear about being a hater. He's clear about that. And a hater is a slave. You're enslaved to hatred. You're enslaved to greed. You're enslaved to indifference. You're enslaved to cruelty. I learned that in Vacation Bible School at Shiloh Baptist Church. It's true. And that's one of the reasons why black folk has never formed a black version of the KKK. Black people know how to counter-terrorize. We know how to hate. We know how to be greedy. We're human beings. Our leadership decided to take a moral and spiritual stand that went beyond just the hatred and the greed and the terror. That's who Frederick Douglass is. That's who Harriet Tubman is. That's who Martin King is. That's who Fannie Lou Hamer is. And if we had not produced them, there would have been a civil war every generation in America. I tell my vanilla brothers and sisters, when you see black people, you ought to just give them a standing ovation. Just give them a standing ovation. Thank you for Martin. Thank you for Fannie Lou. Thank you for those nameless black folk that didn't teach hatred to their children, even though they were hated every day of their life. Oh, that's a spiritual achievement. And it ain't got nothing to do with just being black. It has something to do with paideia, with deep education, passing on that love and courage and integrity even when it doesn't work at the moment. It's better to have some integrity and love in your heart and relatively defeated than be evil, triumphant, and be a gangster on the way to hit up against the wall of history. Oh, that's a great tradition. And we're bouncing back. And Santa Clara University is part of it. I'm serious about that. Not just because I love this brother. I respect the folk I've met. But there's something happening in this place.